Welcome into commodity culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities space. Today I'm joined by Bill Holter, an expert in the precious metals space, a contributor to the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, a former writer for Miles Franklin, among many other accolades. We are, of course, going to be discussing the gold and silver markets today, including Russia's plans to increase its precious metals reserves, the BRICS meeting coming up, hosted by Russia, and the potential for a gold-backed currency to be announced, why we may be reaching the end of the American empire, and much more. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Bill Holter. So I wanted to kick things off today by discussing the gold and silver markets with a broad question. You can take this anywhere you'd like, but I'm wondering what the main catalysts and drivers are that you're currently watching when it comes to both the gold and the silver space that you think people should be paying attention to.
Let me just kind of go back a bit. The gold rally started in October of last year, and that was when the U.S. basically weaponized the dollar, weaponized the SWIFT system, and said that they were going to basically commandeer 300 plus billion of Russian treasuries. And what that did was you had central banks all over the world, sovereign treasuries all over the world, looking at that and saying, well, wait, if they can do that to Russia, they can do it to us. What that's done is it kicked off huge buying worldwide from central banks trying to protect themselves, trying to fill their balance sheets up with something that will fill in the losses that are surely going to come from their dollar holdings. So just understand that's what's happened over the last, call it 1 year now. That's the reason for the rally. As far as what I'm looking at now, I really think we're going to see in a very short period of time, we're in the end game, which is a process. And last Friday, Russia announced that they're going to be buying other strategic commodities, and top of that list was silver. And I've been on the record for over 10 years now that when this thing finally breaks, it would be a failure to deliver in the silver market. It would immediately bleed into the gold market, and you'd see prices go dramatically higher, and that's going to be your loss of confidence. That will be your signal, and investors, central banks, et cetera, worldwide are going to see that type of move as a complete loss of confidence, and that will literally destroy the ability of the Treasury to continue borrowing.
I do want to hone in on the announcement from Russia planning to increase its precious metal reserves. The state fund announcing plans to acquire gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and gemstones. Now, we hear a lot about central banks loading up on gold these days, but Russia seems to really be diversifying its hard assets here. What does this tell you?
It tells me that, well, first off, Russia absolutely understands that gold is the Achilles tendon to the dollar. I mean, you can go back to 2004 and you'll find a picture of Vladimir Putin holding up a 400-ounce bar with a big grin on his face. They've known all along that the Achilles tendon is gold. And what they're doing by making this announcement last Friday is they're putting further pressure on the gold shorts because they're expanding their purchases into, like you said, platinum, palladium, silver, and that is going to directly conflict with the shorts in those markets. And those markets are much, much smaller than gold. Silver is probably the smallest. That if they go into the marketplace and say, buy me, pick a number, $50 million worth of silver. Silver's already in a huge deficit. And what they're doing by announcing, and then if they actually do start buying, is they're going to tip the scales, and that will lead directly to a failure to deliver. And that that pulls the pants down on the West and shows that the whole thing is a fraud.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. Now let's talk about the BRICS summit coming up, hosted by Russia. There's a lot of speculation that they will be making an announcement of some kind of gold or commodities-backed currency. Obviously, Putin has already come out and said they are working on an alternate payment system outside of SWIFT to evade sanctions and kind of the oppression of them being their foreign reserves being seized, as you mentioned. What are your thoughts on the upcoming meeting? Do you expect that such an announcement will occur? And what is your current view on the BRICS in general and their current role on the geopolitical chessboard?
Well, the BRICS basically has become an escape hatch for countries that are on the dollar system. So it's going to give them an alternative. And BRICS, I mean, in two words, it's growing. There's more and more countries that are becoming part of that, which means there's fewer and fewer countries aligned with the U.S. and the dollar-backed or the dollar settlement system. As far as an announcement goes, they're definitely going to come out with a communique. There's no doubt about that. My guess is they make an announcement that might further define how they're going to back the new currency and what they're going to back it with. You may even see percentages. I don't think they're going to go live with it. I mean, if they went live with it, you'd see the Western financial system in chaos, complete tatters, if it's even open by the time we have the election on November 5th. So I suspect they will make an announcement defining better what the unit is going to look like. And I would be surprised if they did come out and say this thing's going live.
And what are your thoughts on China's role in this whole situation? Because they have been advocating for getting rid of the US dollar hegemony for many years now. They are encouraging their own citizens to buy gold. They continue to accumulate gold at record levels. How do you see them playing a role moving forward when it comes to a potential new monetary system?
Basically, I mean, you just explained it with your question. They've for years have complained about the U.S. dollar system. I mean, they're going to be a number one, number two player in the BRICS and obviously calling the shots. So I think that's going to be the role that they play. They do understand that they can't directly confront, and Russia understands this too, that they can't directly confront the U.S. From a financial standpoint, simply because those would be fighting words. And I don't think they want war. I think they just want free and fair trade settlement. They just want to do business. You have to understand the mindset of the Chinese, and I think Vladimir Putin has this same mindset that they know mathematically the U.S. is going to collapse under its own weight. So they don't want to be seen publicly as the cause for the collapse. So that's why they're slowly and methodically pushing the BRICS forward. Don't think they're going to push the U.S. over the edge. It's just going to happen on its own, simply because the math no longer works. When I say math, I'm talking about mean, the simplest one is the amount of interest that's paid on the debt. But just look at the whole system. The whole system is, I mean, it's certainly over leveraged, and I do believe that we're if we're not at, we're extremely close to debt saturation. And if the credit card numbers that were released earlier this week or late last week, if those numbers are correct, it shows you the consumers tapped out. I mean, the whole system is one big debt bomb.
Absolutely. I want to turn to other commodities for a moment outside of the monetary metals. Do you see a bull cycle coming for commodities across the board? Because there is a fairly persistent narrative of a commodities super cycle, a potential rotation out of overvalued tech stocks, the Magnificent Seven, etc., into hard assets in the form of commodities. Are there any other commodities that you're watching that you think present opportunity, whether that's the base metals, uranium, oil and gas? Is there anything on your radar there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at, follow, or trade individual commodities. All I will tell you is that yes, a super cycle is coming because you have a super collapse in the purchasing power of the dollar coming. So if you have the dollar collapse 50%, that's 100% inflation. If you have it collapse 75%, that's 200% inflation. And I mean, to see 50 to 75% drop, that would be my expectation. And I would uh, also like to mention, so people understand this, that when the dollar does collapse in purchasing power, your personal standard of living is going to collapse along with it.
Well, I want to talk about, speaking of standard of living collapsing, there's an article you shared from neverhadaboss.com on your site about the state of the American empire. I found it very interesting. Here's a quote. Here's the betting line for the end of the republic. The open border policy, if continued, has a 100% chance of bringing an end to America, but not now. It will take some time. The risk might be greater given that 750,000 illegal felons that have entered the U.S. Next comes the economy, mismanaged by both parties with a betting line of maybe 80% for destroying the nation. It either falls apart in feudal hell or ends in a civil war. What are your thoughts there? Are we truly reaching? You mentioned the end game earlier. Is that the end game of the American empire? How do you expect that to go? Do you expect the US to break off into different nations eventually?
Oh, I think that's a very real possibility. You could see the republic break. You have to understand there's almost no uh, unrest now, if you will, and that's because people come home, they look on their computer or open their mail or whatever, and they see their account balances. And there's many people, and I'm going to use the word complacency or apathy. People are apathetic or complacent simply because they look at their account statements, whether it be outside monies or 401k monies, they look at the value of their house and they say, well, yeah, all of this stuff is really ridiculous, uh, dangerous, that's coming out of Washington, but it doesn't affect me. So I think there's an apathy factor, if you will, that's still at this point holding society together. But if you see 50, 60, 80% drops in markets and the same amount of drops in people's balances in accounts that they hold, and they see that, they live on a street with 20 houses, and all of a sudden 13 of them are up for sale, and they're all, lowering their prices to try to get out. That's where society is going to break. When people get pissed off because it finally affects them directly.
And do you think we'll see a banking crisis emerge at any point? Obviously, it wasn't that long ago that we saw bank failures when it comes to Silicon Valley, um, signature banks. It seems like that's all but forgotten in the manic news cycle that we have now, where the news just moves so quickly. Could we see bank bail-ins? How do you see the current health of the banking sector in the US, and what do you see as a potential for a banking crisis in the country?
Yeah, first thing, I definitely think there's something going on under the surface. And the reason I say this, why did we have a 50 basis point cut? The Fed has never, ever, ever cut 50 basis points outside of some form of crisis. So if everything's good, stock markets are at all-time highs, housing is very close to all-time highs. That's commercial real estate is an exception. I mean, that's down what, 50, 60, even 80 plus percent in some cases. Uh, but my point being, the Fed cut rates a half a point for some reason. And in my opinion, we'll find out, in my opinion, that some reason is something is on fire underneath the surface. And this was a way to put those flames out in the short term. So to answer your question, I mean, this is math at this point. The banking system, without a doubt, is going to come down. I mean, the entire system is going to come down. And you mentioned bail-ins. I'm glad you didn't say bailouts because there won't ever be any bailouts again, I don't think. I fully believe that David Rogers Webb is 100% correct. Everything is footnoted. The laws are in place. We are going to go through the great taking. If you've got assets in the system, those assets are going to be stripped. So it's urgent at this point to get your assets out of the system with no counterparty risk. That way you get to keep your nest egg.
So then that begs the question of how your average person can protect themselves from what's coming. Obviously, David Rogers Webb, The Great Taking, a terrifying read. And if this sort of thing does come to pass on a global scale, as you said, people will lose anything they have with counterparty risk attached. Does this mean the best way out is to safeguard your wealth through holding physical gold and silver? Is there anything else you would urge people to do to prepare for that type of scenario?
Yeah, the additional to prepare for that would be if you have debt and you can pay it off, pay your debt off. It's still not going to completely protect your house because you're going to have to pay taxes on an annual basis. And only Lord knows where and how high those taxes are going to go. Will you be able to afford it or are you going to have to walk away from your house? We're already seeing that uh, in like South Florida with the homeowners association fees. I mean, some of these people who bought condos 15, 20 years ago are getting bills in the mail of $250,000. And you're going to have people walking away, and those bills are only going to get bigger because your portion of what's left gets bigger. Uh, and as far as preparing, you need to prepare for, I'm going to say a minimum 6 months time where you may not have water, you may not have electricity, you certainly aren't going to have food. I mean, this thing goes down. There's not little elves in the back of your grocery store that bake loaves of bread. Everything gets shipped in. Nothing, when credit breaks, nothing's going to move. Uh, to get out of the system with your wealth, there's only really one way to do that, and that would be to purchase physical gold, physical silver, hold it yourself, or have it vaulted in a non-bank private vault. Do not put anything into a safe deposit box because when your bank goes down, if you ever get to see that safe deposit box again, it'll be empty next time you see it.
Is this collapse going to result in them potentially rolling out a central bank digital currency? It feels like such a project is incredibly time intensive. I'm not sure where they are yet in the development of this technology, if it's ready to roll out or not. Obviously, there's so much that we don't know. But do you anticipate this type of crisis being an opportunity for them to kind of reset their debt by just saying, well, the old system's gone, here's the new one, Fed coin, you want 1,000 free dollars, just register your wallet here. Do you see that sort of scenario playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what the World Economic Forum plan, the Great Reset, is all about. They want to take people's wealth, they want to crash the system, and get the population to beg for help, and that help is going to be a central bank digital currency. I mean, it's it's the way to get the population to ask or even demand to give up their banking, personal finance privacy. That's what central bank digital currency does. If we get to that point, or when we get to that point, I don't think the central bank digital currencies are going to last very long. I mean, you may only see them last 6 months, and a true Mother Nature reset takeover where people will not accept anything that's not backed by something real. That's what the BRICS is all about. Is they want to trade something real for something real, and you've got the WEF that wants to slide from the dollar to another fiat non-bank but digital currency, and the reason behind that is they want to be able to view every stick of gum that you purchase, and they'll be able to do that.
That's interesting. So when it comes to the BRICS nations in this type of scenario, how will those countries react in your view? How would a government like China's or Russia's react in the case of a collapse of credit that you've just outlined?
Well, they'll trade amongst themselves. I mean, obviously, there will be a big dent in their trade because a lot of the trade is with the West, but that will eventually right itself, and the trade will expand amongst those nations, and eventually, at some point in time, once the West comes up with a currency that's acceptable to the East, then trade will begin to resume there. Uh, Everyone's going to get hurt. And I've talked for years, China does have a huge debt problem, but understand what China did building up that debt over the years. What did they do? They built railroads, they built airports, they built uh, they built cities, they built infrastructure. While the West, we ate our seed corn. So if the system goes down, or when the system goes down, the West is going to be left basically sucking their thumb, and the East is going to be left with infrastructure. And I'm not so sure that it's even going to matter to the East. Yes, their banks are going to go down too, but they're going to be left with something real, and we're going to be left with nothing.
Let's talk about the current push to outlaw free speech going on, particularly in Western countries. Hillary Clinton being one in the long line of political elites who say free speech needs to be curbed for our own good. Obviously, the EU pushing a big campaign against so-called misinformation, talking about removing X from the internet, controlling what can be said and what can't be said. How does this all fit into that puzzle of this collapse you're talking about? Is this kind of part and parcel? They're just trying to silence speech as much as possible so that when this collapse does occur, that people aren't able to communicate freely about what's going on. What's your thoughts there?
Right, and that's the reason the post I think you're referring to, I posted regarding Hillary Clinton, and at the very end, uh, she said unless social media I believe she used the word uh, manage speech, manage misinformation, and I mean the real word is censor. That's what she was getting at. Unless they can censor what they call misinformation, which in reality is truth, unless they can censor that, she went on to say, we will lose total control. And you got to ask, what do you mean by we? Who's we? And I didn't think anybody was supposed to have total control or, even control. And it's not the way capitalism, uh, it's not the way the world has worked, for lots of years until recently. You've got this big censor effect because literally everything that's coming out of, and I'll just talk about the United States, everything that's coming out of Washington, D.C. is 100% pure bullshit, outright lies. And you've got the media backing that up so that if you say, well, this is not true, blah, 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 this is what happened, the media will come out and say, oh, well, your point has already been debunked. Well, debunked by whom and by what? I think it's extremely dangerous that this is happening. And the only thing I could say is in the United States, the Second Amendment will guarantee the First Amendment.
Now, I'd like to shift for a moment to the expanding global conflict going on and kind of maybe pinpoint into the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because a lot of people I've spoken to and people who seem to actually be paying close attention to the situation, John Mersheimer being one, Scott Ritter, etc., have said that they do not believe that Ukraine has the capability of winning this war. And yet we hear from the mainstream media time and time again, any small piece of news that seems to be good for Ukraine, they're pumping that up. You have political elites in Europe and America saying that we will not stand for anything other than a total victory in Ukraine, sending more money, sending more weapons. This seems like complete insanity. Yeah. So why are they not willing to sit down at the negotiating table? Why are they pushing for something that could potentially end in a nuclear conflict?
Because it's a money laundering operation. I mean, it's all about the West sending money to provide for Ukraine. It gets to Ukraine, then it goes out the back door, and you got these politicians. It goes into the politicians' pockets. It's all about money. Ukraine does not have a chance, didn't have a chance from day one to win this. And I've said this on quite a few interviews before. I would urge people, and I just recently posted, I think there was 4 or 5 of Putin's interviews up until late last year. If you read what Vladimir Putin has been saying since before the invasion and since, read what the man has said and ask yourself, do I agree or disagree with what this man has said? And I think you'll be hard pressed to disagree with almost anything he says because he's using pure logic. You had, Russians were being slaughtered, and he pressed for negotiations, peace, many times prior to the invasion, and was completely rebuffed. He was pushed into a corner, and the only response he had was the response we've seen. So do yourself a favor and read his speeches, and you use your own opinion. Either agree or disagree with what the man says. But I can say personally, I've read all of those speeches, and there's very little that I disagree with.
And your thoughts on the expanding conflict in the Middle East? It's kind of crazy because whenever I go on social media, I'm kind of bombarded with accounts that are really pro-Israel. Then I'm bombarded with other accounts that are pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah. Both sides accusing the other of all sorts of atrocities. It's very difficult to find the truth within that. What is the purpose of that particular conflict in your view? Is this a distraction? Is this connected at all to the collapse and to the political elites in the West? What is your current view on that conflict?
I really don't. I really don't know. I'm not in the back rooms as to the why this was done. All I'm going to say is, yeah, there's been atrocities on both sides. It's a complete tragedy. If I had to guess, why now, why this is happening? We live in a world where the powers that be in the West want war. They want war for one of two reasons. Either because war, historically has always been good for real economies, not necessarily markets, generally markets, but it's good for the real economy. My my thought process is they want war because they know this thing is just about ready to fall over, and they're going to need something to point at so that the fingers don't get pointed at them. That's just, my guess, my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good guess. I want to end on asking, is there any parts of the world that you think are maybe better to be than the West at this point? I'll preface that with the fact that I fled my own country of Canada in October of 2021. I relocated to the Balkan region. I currently live in Serbia. It's just the level of freedom, and just nobody here trusts their government coming from former Yugoslavia. There was obviously that horrible war, basically yesterday in history. That was in the 1990s. And nobody here wants war again. Nobody here trusts their government. Cash is still widely used. There's a whole bunch of facets. The bureaucracy is just also so broken. It's difficult for the government to really get anything done, which is also kind of an advantage. I'm wondering, yeah, from my position sitting here in Serbia, I feel much more comfortable than I did back home in Canada. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on different areas of the world that could potentially provide more freedom. A lot of people are pointing to Argentina and El Salvador right now. Do you have any thoughts there, and any other areas you see that could perhaps be a better place to be than the West?
As you may or may not know, I left the country at the very end of 2006 because I saw '07, '08 coming. I moved to Costa Rica. I lived there for 5 years. My Spanish got good enough to understand that they smile at us, gringos, they smile at us, but they don't really like us. And when the system goes down, the central bank of Costa Rica, their reserves, basically 100% are US dollars. So when the US goes down, Costa Rica is going to go down. And when Costa Rica goes down, if you're a gringo, doesn't matter if you're very poor and you're living month to month off of Social Security, you're viewed as rich, and gringos are going to be wiped out. So we came back in 2011. We were there for about 5 years. Uh, in South America, the only place that, and I've spoken to a few people on this, the only place that I see as an option would be Uruguay. Um, and I mean, that may not be an option. I can tell you I've had this discussion regarding, where do you go? And I've come to the conclusion, and this was actually offered, I think, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, by Russia. I think Russia is a safe haven, and they've offered to expats that no longer have confidence in their government. They've offered them, I don't know if you want to call it asylum or whatever, um, but you can get in, which is not something. I mean, I'm this shy of 65 years old. I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in the 70s. We got to see Cass and Pravda and all the bullshit they were pumping. And it's laughable now that the roles are reversed. All of the US media is as bad or worse than what the Soviet Union media was back then. And if you want real news, I mean, if you see something on RT, it's generally pretty correct. So things have flipped 180 degrees. You could never have told me when I was a kid that the words out of my mouth would be, yeah, I think Russia is a viable haven.
Yeah, that's super interesting. They're waiving a Russian language requirement, which I believe you originally had to go through to be able to be considered for residency. I think that is certainly a very fascinating path, as well. Well, Bill, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. For those who want to hear more from you, tell us about billholter.com, and if there's anywhere else you want to direct people, feel free.
Yeah, you can go to billholter.com. There are icons up top. It will default to articles that I've written, other people have written, and my comments to those articles. There is an interview button up there, so if you want to watch all of my interviews, every one of them gets posted on that page. There is a contact button if you want to reach me, or if you want to reach me directly, uh, as I am a precious metals broker. If you want to reach me directly, my business email is bholter@proton.me.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put a link to the website as well as that email address below in the description. Thank you once again, Bill. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And thank you for joining us today. This episode has been brought to you by ARC, Silver, Gold, Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. And make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.